those are good, great points. And the other point that I believe in the book they pointed out was if you want to command that respect, is speaking the vernacular of the ER. And so as an educator, some of the feedback I get from my students, well, why do I have to learn these medical terminologies? Can you speak a little bit on that and your experience with that?
That's you're having me reflect back many years. Remember, I said earlier we had to teach the emergency rooms on what we were doing. When I was riding one day with our medical director, Dr. Caroline, and we treated a gentleman, a young guy that suffered a syncopal episode at work, and we get there and we treated him, we gave him oxygen, started an IV on him, took his blood pressure, put him on an EKG monitor, and did a complete workup on him. And en route to the emergency room, she and I were kind of role playing onto what I was going to say to the ER. So by the time we arrived there, I was fine. At least I thought I was. I go into the emergency room. We drop off the patient. A nurse comes in the room, and I said, we have a 25-year-old male that suffered a syncopal episode at work while lifting boxes. On physical exam, his blood pressure was whatever it is. His EKG reading was a tachybrady rhythm. We administered oxygen. I started an IV of lactated ringers. The lung sounds are clear. I listened to his heart, and it's a minor heart murmur that he has, no pertinent past history, and he's stable. And she bust out laughing. And she couldn't stop laughing. And unfortunately, at that particular time, in my mind, I'm telling you what you need to hear about this patient, and you're laughing at me. She was not accustomed to someone, number one, that looked like me, and number two, a paramedic coming into an emergency room, giving them a full workup on a patient. Today, you wouldn't dare come into an emergency room and not give a complete historical perspective on a patient. It's ironic because I'd like to use this as an example, and I may be veering off. Right now, this country is in an opioid crisis. And the drug of choice to treat that is?
Fentanyl.
What do you treat?
The treatment, Narcan, yes. Sorry.
Narcan, yes. It's this wonder drug. Everybody has it. You can get it over the counter. Addicts themselves have Narcan and things like that. But what people don't realize is Freedom House administered Narcan back in 1973. So it's really not, to me, when I see this, I'm saying, well, what is the big deal? And we were so far ahead of our time, Dr. Eggers, is that it boggles my mind today. None of our opioid overdoses, and there was no fentanyl back then, they were all heroin. None of them woke up in the back of our vehicles. We didn't want them to wake up.
Right. Read that in the book that you were titrating to effect just to keep them. And it's amazing to me that you guys were ahead of your time. That's why I'm just talking about innovation. You were so ahead of your time. And it came from Dr. Saffer saying, well, we use this in the OR for anesthesia to bring them around. Why not use it in the field and then just bring it up enough so they just are comfortable and you're not putting them into opiate withdrawal, which is amazing. Because then I know in my time, our standard, when I first started a long time ago, you just slammed 2 milligrams and expected them to come up not very happy and throwing up and everything else that goes with it. So then I read that, I was like, wow, 1973, they were actually doing it like we are now, which is just titrating it. So.
Yeah, and it's amazing because, we look at our own protection at that particular time. Because, you obviously, I've ruined your $25 high. So obviously you either want to get angry with me or jump out of the back of the vehicle or beat me up or whatever the case is. I didn't have that worry. I kept you in a confused daze state until I get you to the emergency room in a more controlled environment. So, it's amazing that the stuff that we did. I don't know whether they do it anymore, but we were the first to transmit an EKG from the field back to the emergency room.
I think we're starting to get back into that where we are transmitting directly now. I've been out of the game a little bit, but I'm thinking that's what's happening. We're recycling that, which is a good idea.
Yeah. So it's we're going back a lot of years, but the monitors nowadays are what, 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds at least. Imagine carrying something about 25, 30 pounds into a person's home and and putting that on them. The stretchers nowadays lift themselves. You have video intubation. And I tried that at a conference I was at, and I just couldn't mentally see myself watching a camera to do it. So I ended up looking around there instead of looking at the camera. So I'm glad to see these different types of innovations and the training itself. But despite all that, there has to be a foundation of everything that paramedics do today.
And we're really appreciative because you gave us that very solid foundation to, like I said earlier, stand on the shoulder of giants, and that's what you guys were. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to open it up for the panel to ask whatever questions, and our audience, I'm sure they have some questions that they might like to ask you. This is your opportunity. We haven't heard from Tyrone and Gerald, so they actually have an MIH program in Marion County, so I didn't know if maybe they would want to ask you a question about that. I think they're having trouble unmuting.
Yeah, there you go. I went too far off the screen. I mean, yeah, a lot of the questions I had written down, you've answered a lot of them. But one thing I was like, if they're what do you think is your most significant impact of your work that you did that was in the community, other than when you started the whole thing?
The most significant impact was seeing what I did 50 years ago come to fruition now. And it's just mind-boggling to me that, as I mentioned earlier, we weren't trying to design an EMS system for the country. People still today like to give the credit to Johnny and Roy, who used to ride around in the red pickup truck. But what people don't know is Freedom House's paramedics went to Los Angeles, talked with the producer to assist them in designing that television program that came about in 1972. So really, my most rewarding component is seeing something that I was part of, or the foundation of, still in existence today. I still would love to see an increase in diversity in EMS. That is near and dear to my heart, because when I don't see that, I often wonder, how can that be when you have an all African American service that began this well over 50 plus years ago, and then there's a problem with it. And so that's one of the things that primarily concerns me. But my most rewarding experience primarily is seeing the fruits of my labor still be in existence today. I obviously, I can talk about the book American Sirens. There's a documentary out. First Responders that won an Emmy. Those are all great things, but it's just I still see my labor going. Every time I see a ambulance go down the street, I look for two things. I look to see if there's anyone in it that looks like me, and oftentimes there isn't. And I often wonder whether the people that are in there really know where the foundation of EMS began. So those are the things that are motivating me right now to try to keep this part of history alive, because very few people know about it. There are people that work for Pittsburgh EMS that have never heard of Freedom House. So those are the things that I'm working on right now to change.
Thank you. Dr. Jameson, do you have a question for him?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Great to see you again, Chief.
Yes.
I'm sure you don't remember me, but I was a wide-eyed intern at Pittsburgh when you were just retiring, and so I did get to see you there, and I certainly was really privileged to attend the luncheon at the William Penn this past spring as the Florida EMS medical director at the National Association of EMS state officials meeting.
Yes.
Quite an afternoon, I thought. It occurs to me as we're talking about this stuff that there's a parallel here to what you all accomplished those many years ago that could inform what is going on in EMS today. We sometimes talk about in the hospital the therapeutic relationship, how you sort of connect with your patient, how you achieve their trust in a quick and effective kind of way. And certainly you had some experience doing that in circumstances that are beyond what many of us face on a daily basis these days. And as EMS kind of evolves into the future, where we have during the last few years, during COVID, et cetera, taken on new roles in our communities, and we continue to take on new roles beyond just a 911 call and some stabilizing care and transport to the hospital. There's all these new things that EMS is considering or even beginning. If you look at the guys up in Marion, their programs, and how are there any lessons that you think would translate from what happened way back there in Pittsburgh, the evolution of that, and how we could go about not only gaining individual patients' trust, but the healthcare system's trust, the local community's trust as we move into these other roles? Because it seems like there's some concern about taking on these new roles, expanding the things that we do for the community, and yet there's a need that's clearly there in a lot of communities. So I'm just curious, what are the techniques of getting in that position that you think might translate to where we're going today?
Well, I think there's a lot of effort being placed on taking the paramedic off of the vehicle or putting him into emergency rooms and putting him out into the community to have their I know here in Pittsburgh, we're experiencing or experimenting with the community paramedic to follow patients once they're discharged from the ER. There are some states that have tried to impact the opioid crisis by having a rapid crisis response unit that respond to opioid overdose crisis within various communities. And it's easy to do it at the time, but once that patient is brought into the emergency room, treated, and then released, is there a follow-up? So I think somewhere along the line, there has to be a continuation of care from the time that patient leaves the emergency room and goes back home, irregardless of what the medical chief complaint was. And right now, I think the opioid crisis is a very good example of that. You know, you come to my home and you give me Narcan and you save my life, and life goes on, and I go back into the world that I was in when you first found me. So I think some type of follow-up would be critical in dealing with the community, because whether we oftentimes look at it as that, because that's where your allies are. And this may be difficult, but if you look at, I know here in Pittsburgh, if you look at the way the fire department is designed, a lot of their PR is without into the community, whether smoke detectors, whether it's collecting money for muscular dystrophy, whatever. They basically have created an ally in the community. I know here in Pittsburgh, you wouldn't dare think about closing a fire station because the community would not allow you to do that. So I think it's just as important that EMS itself takes a very aggressive effort in going back out into the community and letting them know, hey, we do exist here, besides the 911 call. And so every community has to experience that. You know, every community has community day. Why not have a vehicle there with personnel showing you the equipment that's on it, giving you an opportunity to understand what the training consists of and things like that. So I think your point's very valid. The paramedic is somewhat, has a multifaceted role here. He really does. I treat you, I transport you to the emergency room, but what happens once you're discharged? Does that treatment continue? So I think along those lines, you have to kind of change with the times, and I think that's what EMS is doing.
Yeah, I see it just such a clear parallel between you in that operating room or you giving that report to the nurse who started laughing, and me sitting down with a health system administrator and saying, hey, I want outcomes data on every patient I transport to you. And oh, by the way, I want to continue to be involved in their care after you discharge them, and literally get, sometimes get a laugh. And it's just, it's really interesting to see the parallel there as we take the next steps in EMS, the parallels between the things you overcame in the beginning. I'm curious from the guys in Marion, have you had that moment with your program up there where folks were sort of saying, who are you? What are you doing here? That's not what your role is?
Yeah, since we started our program, because our program's been up and going now for 4 years. And when we first started the program, it wasn't accepted as well because it was different. People wasn't used to us coming in and saying, okay, we're gonna continue your care from the hospital. But now, since we've done it, everyone is more receptive to the fact of us coming in, and they actually welcome it. And we actually get we've gotten a lot of community involvement, invited to speak at a lot of elderly communities, as well as health fairs, things of that nature. And it's like when they hear that that's something that we're doing now, it's like open. They're shocked that we're doing it as a fire department. They said they didn't know there's something that existed. And we started our program by partnering with Advent. Advent actually approached our chiefs and was saying, okay, we want to try and reduce readmissions to the hospital. So this is what we want to do. And they gave us funding to do that at first. And that's how we got our patient base at first. Now our crews, when they go out to a patient's home and they see that they can benefit from our, CP program, they'll call us directly or send us a referral to go out and follow up with those patients. So it's like I say, it's more receptive now, and we're actually bringing on more people to be a part of our team. Right now, we're a team of 3 with the PA, and we're actually bringing on 5 more people to grow our team even more.
Was there a particular event or patient or case or something that was equivalent to that first intubation in the OR that really like, got you over a hump somewhere?
Well, not necessarily that particular thing. It was the challenge itself, because at that particular time, I think it was the best mode of training under a life or death situation, because the patient was already anesthetized. You, meaning myself, was not necessarily receptive in that environment itself. So from my standpoint, I was put in the perfect situation to succeed. And so that is a crowning moment for me, because the obstacles and the hurdles and the barriers, they were there. It's just that I had a choice to make. Do I let them overcome me, or do I knock them down? And I chose to do the latter. And it's ironic that we're talking about that, because I have used that same format throughout my, obviously I'm not in EMS now, but throughout my entire EMS career. I looked at every call I went on as a challenge. So irrespectively of how minor or how major it was or critical, it was a challenge for me to try to correct that problem or whatever the issue was. And I think that's the one thing that going into the operating room kind of stuck out with me. It was just one of those challenges that, okay, bring on the next one. And in order to be, it continued from that point on.
Anisha, do you have any other questions for him?
Okay. I was just wondering, when was the first time you seen like a Black woman paramedic in your area? Like, did it take like a long time from the 30 years you're in Pittsburgh?
At the time, ironically, I'm going to try to draw you a picture. As I mentioned earlier, Pittsburgh EMS was supposed to take all of Freedom House's people. There were a few females that worked there. And the ones that were not initially trained to the level of paramedics or EMTs, they were put in probably other jobs within the city. And one in particular was assigned to search frisk prisoners at the city jail. And she did that for probably 6 or 7 months while going to EMT school. She in turn, once she completed EMT training, went to paramedic training. And once she completed that, then she got hired. Remember, she's just a person that frisks people at the jail, or jail attendants, or whatever they call them. She applied to become a paramedic at the city of Pittsburgh, and the first African-American female there. While she was there working as a paramedic, she went back to nursing school and became a registered nurse. And while she was working as a paramedic for the city, she worked as a registered nurse in the emergency room at the local hospital. So she is one of the types of examples of diligence and resiliency and perseverance to accomplish a particular goal, because she was still part of that group that the city of Pittsburgh was trying to get rid of. And she's made up her mind that that was not going to happen. And basically, she accomplished that goal and went to become a paramedic, and subsequently retired a few years ago.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.
Does any other, before we open it up to the participants, does any of the panelists have any further questions for Chief Moon?
I do. Gerald. Hello, Chief. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm enjoying this.
Yeah, so am I. This is extremely informative. Thank you for being here. I actually have a question. What were some of the things that you did to prepare yourself to go against the status quo of those institutions, when you challenged the department, when you challenged the state, when you challenged all these things, especially knowing all of the purposeful obstacles that they had in your way? What were some of the things that you did to fortify your position, to prepare for that? And also, so I guess it's like a twofold question. What were some of the things that you did to basically fortify your own mind when things got tough, because you knew that people were purposely putting obstacles in your way so that you would not be successful?
That's an excellent point. In order to give you an idea, I'm going to try and paint you a quick picture. I trace it all the way back to my childhood. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. The city was completely segregated. That was the law. My mother died when I was probably about 4 or 5. And my father was tasked with taking care of myself and my sister. He did the best he could, but once he discovered that it was something he was not going to accomplish, he had to make the ultimate decision. So he gave us up, where we were placed in an orphanage. And I was actually raised in an orphanage in Atlanta, Georgia, with about 60, 70, 80 other children. And I spent 8 years there. And that itself was I would say, the crowning moment that I had to learn how to be self-sufficient and self-supporting and being an overcomer. I had to, and to make matters, I'm not going to say worse because they were better, I got adopted into a family that I didn't know I had. So I was actually, unbeknownst to me at the time, while I was there, being prepared to deal with the hurdles and the obstacles and the barriers that were going to come later on in my life, but I just undertook them at an early childhood. So that is the thing that kind of guided my direction more so than anything else, to the point that any hurdle or barrier that I come up against, all while I was working with Pittsburgh EMS, I use it as a motivator. So the more hurdles, the more resistance you threw at me, because, you know, the department was not welcoming diversity at that time. And here I come along trying to change things. We were accustomed to the status quo. And here you come trying to upset the apple cart. So I'm going to throw a hurdle here and a hurdle there. And it's ironic because the people that I selected for this program, failure was not an option for them. I wasn't going to let them fail. And just to give you an example, there were single parents there. And whenever they had to do a clinical internship, I babysat their kids. Yeah. While I was working, I would go home and they would drop their kids off to my house, and I would watch their kids until they completed their clinical rotations at the hospital. They would come back and pick them up. And so I was determined not to give them excuse to fail. So that just traces all the way back. All it was a hurdle. So I had to figure out a way around it, and that's what I did. So there are people that are working for Pittsburgh EMS now that came, and this happened back in 1990. They're still there. There are some that have gone on and got their pension and things like that, and living a decent life, where that opportunity would not have been there had somebody not stepped up and said, no, we have to do this. So yeah, any type of hurdle, a barrier that even today, and I'm 75 years old, if I come across something that I can't accomplish, it motivates me to try even harder, and I can't help it because it has been part of me. So yeah, I use hurdles and barriers and problems and things as motivators, and I instill that same mindset into the chief of Pittsburgh EMS, who's a very dear friend of mine today. That whenever she calls and says, this is happening, I said, well, what are you going to do about it? So.
That's awesome. That's an amazing.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions on the panel? Well, hopefully we have some people still with us, and I would love to open it up for anybody that's participating to ask your questions. I think we still have Chief Engel still on there. If he has any questions, that he was one of the first 40 paramedics that started in Pittsburgh when the Pittsburgh EMS came around, and he became chief of Palm Harbor and ran the fire academy. Now he's retired. And he said he was going to be on this, and I see a James on there. I'm not sure if it's him or not. Chief Engel, are you on? No, maybe not. He just jumped off.
Just a reminder for all the attendees, you can either raise your hand or you can type a question in the question thing or in the chat thing. There's been a few comments in the chat from some educators in the room, and I'd like to point out that Chief was babysitting his students' kids. That's pretty amazing. There's a couple folks that have written in the chat that they have made things about Freedom House required reading in their training programs. And in their academies. So pretty cool.
Yeah, I saw that. And they were, so I was an educator at one of the local colleges, and we found that we had to overcome some of the challenges for our students, and did stuff like food, cooking them dinners and lunches while they're in school. And so there is some challenges to overcome, and it does take educators like you that overcome those obstacles and hurdles to make them successful. And they definitely, we see that still today. Anybody in the audience that would like to, or the participants that would like to ask a question, just raise their hand. This is a great opportunity. We just got some shy folks, that's all.
Well, while they're waiting, there's a couple of things that here in Pittsburgh that we're doing, that it's continuing the legacy of Freedom House. Right now, we have a program called Freedom House 2.0, and it's based around the format that Freedom House used, where a lot of single parents with kids are recruited and placed into an EMT program. It's basically they're actually given a stipend to go. They're given laptops and BP cuffs and So they're actually being exposed to the world of EMS. And like you mentioned, they're single parents, and a couple of them bring their kids to class because the daycare is perhaps closed today or what have you. Obviously, they're given a lunch and transportation, back and forth to class, whether it's via the public transportation or what have you. So that's all in honor of the efforts of Freedom House, and that's done by foundational grants that are given to the organization as a whole, and it's managed by a couple of emergency physicians who started, and then you have paramedic instructors and EMT instructors that teach the students and things like that. So the new class will start next Monday, and it's expanding into other cities within Pennsylvania.
We have a comment that says, I really appreciate your time. I enjoyed the stories and important history of the origin of EMS. I'll be sure to talk to everyone I work with about it.
Okay, thank you.
We have a question too from Bruce Muller. He says, Chief Moon, what one piece of advice would you provide for future leaders in EMS, specifically as it relates to their ability to make changes in their systems, recognizing the differences between your challenges of the and those future leaders might be facing?
I look at that, and to me, it's a easy question to answer, but it's somewhat difficult to accomplish. But no matter what you're going to come up against, you have to have a legacy of perseverance, resiliency, and determination, because the obstacles are going to be there no matter what. It's up to you to decide whether you're going to allow them to overtake you or you're going to do that. So you have to be resilient, you have to persevere, and you have to be determined to accomplish whatever goal that you set out to do. And that's the reason we have a Freedom House today, because it began with a group of visionaries who took that vision to help this underserved community and gave it to an innovator. And he took his innovation and gave it to a group of individuals that by society standards were not supposed to succeed at doing anything. So I've labeled the people at Freedom House creative change makers. So you have visionaries, innovators, and a group of creative change makers that were determined, persevered, and were resiliency to accomplish that goal that you have today.
I like that, innovative change makers. That's perfect. Mm-hmm. That's perfect.
Mm-hmm. I want to circle back to one thing that Anisha had asked before about female Black paramedics. And I know you mentioned Chief Gilchrist a minute ago, and I apologize if I missed it. I had to take a couple radio calls before, but did you describe her career and what she currently does?
Well, yes, she's been chief of Pittsburgh EMS since May 5th of last year, of 2023. I'm sorry, and right now she has a department of 200 and some personnel. She has a $50 million budget that she has to deal with. She has a deputy, but her role was unique in itself because she has, in other words, my legacy lives at Pittsburgh EMS through her, because she was one of my hires through my diversity recruitment program. And I mentored her from an EMT to a paramedic, to a crew chief, to a division chief, to an assistant chief, to a deputy chief, and now she runs the department. Like I mentioned, nobody in the 50-year history of Pittsburgh EMS has ever accomplished that goal. Nobody. So, and ironic thing is, she has the ear of the mayor, and she can get anything she wants for that.
I saw that at the meeting. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, she does. Uh-huh. Yes.
I just wanted to highlight that again because, as you say, it's a living evidence of just one of the many things that you achieved at Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm very, very proud of her. And you know, in her office, she has a large emblem of Freedom House Ambulance Service in her office, and she has emblems scattered throughout the outer office that have the history of Freedom House on there. So she knows where the foundation of EMS began and the shoulders that she rests on, and she will not hesitate to let people know.
I just had one more question for you, and then I'll be quiet. I promise.
No, that's okay. I'm enjoying this.
What resource or place would you suggest that folks go to learn more about this history, both of what happened at Freedom House, the transition to Pittsburgh EMS, the evolution of that department to where it is today, and the lessons that can be learned from that? Is there, I know there's been a movie, there's been books, there's been, where would you point somebody that wants to find out more?
Well, those are two of the critical components within, from a historical standpoint. The documentary itself, First Responders, kind of chronicles the community itself and the evolution of Freedom House and the key players and how it came about. And also it chronicles the dissolution of Freedom House and how it went, was absorbed by Pittsburgh EMS and some of the intended intentions of the department, as well as, you know, city government, because Freedom House could not compete in a political environment. And once racism reared its ugly head, those two kind of merged together, and Freedom House couldn't exist in that environment. So we bowed out gracefully, number one, and number two, we had no idea what the challenge that lied ahead until we got to the city of Pittsburgh. And all of us were not as resilient because Pittsburgh EMS was able to remove, I would say, roughly 75 to 80% of all of Freedom House's personnel during that transition timeframe, and it was planned that way. And
I'm sorry, the book American Sirens talks about some of the folks that didn't have the resiliency, and it ends with that story. And to me, that emphasizes the compassion and empathy that needs to be in our profession. Can we end that? Because I think that was a really good story. Can we kind of summarize that and your part when you really put your arms around him and had to talk with that individual, with the compassion that you gave to this person to help him?
Well, ironically, it was a situation where I intervened to prevent something terrible from happening, because you have a mental health crisis to deal with, and then you have a somewhat unempathetic, unsympathetic police force at that particular time. So there's a great chance that had I not intervened in that situation with him standing on that street corner and yelling at people as they passed by, that something terrible would have happened to him. because at that time, there was no such thing as police accountability. No video cameras and things like that. So in my mind, I knew where they were going. So I had to get there to prevent something terrible from happening, because I knew, unfortunately, the police were not equipped to handle mental health crises. And oftentimes, that's one of the main problems with, a lot of police forces today. I'm not necessarily being critical of them, but it's just a mere fact that it's just coming into focus on how important the mental health crisis is. As if I'm not accustomed to dealing with it, I think this person is still a subject as opposed to a patient.
And I think we're missing that compassion and empathy sometimes in our own profession, especially when it comes to mental health crisis or opiate abuse patients, that we're trying to change that vision. But that's what caught my attention in that book, is the compassion that you showed that person to de-escalate them, basically saved him, like you said, from a poor situation. And I thought that was a great ending to the story, of a full circle to me. Well, thank you very much for being here. This is, I think, an important topic. And the Florida Center of EMS really appreciates you joining us and helping us kick off our educational platform. And like I said, I was trying to figure out how to, one of our pillars is innovation and research and education. Those are three of our main pillars. How we have to know where we came from and where that foundation started, where those innovations and perseverance and everything that you summed up, where we need to go to make our profession go to that next level. And I think we're ready to take that step to go to the next level. And we need to know where we came from to do that. And I really appreciate that.
And you're welcome so much. And I can't thank you all enough. And even though I'm the person that we've all been talking to today, it's not necessarily about me as an individual. I'm just the platform or the vehicle used to get this important part of history out there. It's about a group of people that weathered setbacks and disappointments and broken promises to create a system that we all take for granted today, that's glorified on television. To me, that's the legacy of Freedom House Ambulance Service.
Thank you very much. And thank you, panelists, Amisha, Tyrone, Gerald, and Dr. Jameson. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you very much for the participants that joined in. This is going to be, it's recorded, so we're going to actually put this on the platform so for more people to be able to view at their leisure anytime they want to. Anybody else have any final words, Dr. J? Nope.
Thanks, Chief.
You're
Great
welcome.
to see you, Chief. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you all.
Very
I
much.
really appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.